Day 367 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. And we'll start off with heading over to the Russian military losses, where Russia is currently sitting on 147,470 military personnel losses there. Then when we take a look at the Russian hardware losses, 12 tanks, 9 APVs, 10 artillery, and even 1 helicopter. So there's really been no shortage of Russian hardware losses for at least a few days now. And see that tank number, for instance? Russia does not have the production capacity or capability to replenish 12 tanks per day, and probably even per month, at least not any of the newer ones. Even though they've decided to fix up some of their older T-62 Soviet-era tanks. Meanwhile, tanks for Ukraine are coming in droves, and I'll certainly touch on that topic shortly. So we'll move back to the Ukrainian map now, and in light of the recent one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion into Ukraine, there was a lot less activity than anticipated in the recent days on the map, but certainly there's been plenty of news. But we'll start out with the map still, and we'll move across to the Donbass. So in the north, no changes on the battle lines here, although Russian forces are concentrating artillery on Ukrainian-controlled territory west of the Oskil River there. So moving across to, ideally they'd like to take Kupiansk back, but it's a virtual impossibility at this point. Then moving across to the Crimea area, so there's also no changes here. In fact, for the last week, this has not changed at all, this front line, at least from what we've been officially shown here. But the southwest of the forest, southwest forest in Crimea, there's certainly fighting continuing in that region right there. Then we'll take a look a bit further down to Bakhmut. So Russian forces really seem to be just continuing marching in as cannon fodder east of Bakhmut, for instance, most recently, many times over. And evidently without any anti-tank gear to suppress Ukrainian heavy armor either. Which just feels strange, even though I know deep down the funding for weapons of that caliber were instead just funneled towards some Russian oligarchs' super yacht instead. But really, the Russian strategy here appears to be the same, unchanged, wave after wave of cannon fodder. Firstly, Russian infantry coming close, then Ukrainian machine cannons raze them to the ground. And also, not a piece of Russian heavy armor in sight. It's almost like a luring in tactic being deployed here by the Russian forces. Let them come a bit closer, then for instance BMP-2 fire cannons just shoot out at the encroaching or attempting to encroach Russian infantry forces there. Then in the southwest, so near Ivaniska, so the situation is quite stable here, no real changes at the moment. However, the Russian forces continue to push in for a creep or an attempted creep in the north of Bakhmut. And in particular, you might remember, the settlement of Yahidne is still under heavy fighting there. And also we've seen Ukrainian fighter jets continue to fly in or nearby the Bakhmut airspace as they perform their support-related sorties in the region. Then we move down to Vuhledar, where the Russian forces continue to show the definition of insanity by doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Like most recently, with the Russian forces rushing over the open field against Ukrainian defense lines and minefields, in what would appear like just yet another preference of the Russian forces to trash their remaining vehicles and then crawl back to behind their own lines. They don't learn. And it's frighteningly confusing how they don't really seem to switch up their tactics here much at all, if at all, really, because, well, one factor that would has been cited as contributing to this is the relatively centralized command structures of the Russian military, which can make it difficult for lower ranking officers and soldiers to make independent decisions or adapt to changing circumstances on the ground. And another factor is Russia's continued emphasis on traditional, conventional warfare tactics, which is an approach that simply is less adaptable to more fluid and dynamic battlefields. Then, further in the south, two Russian BMPs, a tank, and an SPG, so a self propelled howitzer, a gun, SPG, were destroyed during Ukraine's latest strike at a Russian base in occupied Melitopol. Here we go. It was also reported that 50 Russian military personnel there were either heavily wounded or, even worse, liquidated. Then looking around to nearby occupied Crimea, so a railway was damaged halfway between Sevastopol and Simferopol, the two biggest cities or hubs in the peninsula there, and likely done so by Ukrainian partisans in the region. Now, it's not huge damage, but every little potential logistics delay has its advantages naturally. But also in this region, I can hardly believe it, Ukrainian partisans flying the Ukrainian flag, like the heroes that they are, this time at the occupied city of Sevastopol. So that is pretty impressive. Really ballsy move too. Then we'll move across to the news for the day. Like I said, a bit of more of a news day. So Ukraine marks its 1-year anniversary just yesterday of Russia's invasion. I was not in to record a video on the day. And as this happened, Poland delivered its first batch of Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. And we even have the Ukraine's Minister of Defense checking them out. And then immediately after asking for directions to Moscow as soon as he pops out of the hatch of one of these cats. And to have these bad boys arrive in Ukraine is particularly significant because, to be honest, most countries do not want to be known as the first country to send NATO-level tanks to Ukraine. And really it's for fear of some sort of nuclear retaliation. A risk posed by Russia that is likely more of an empty threat. And I'm starting to wonder if they even pose a credible nuclear threat to the West at the moment. They just had a failed ICBM test the other day. That was quite embarrassing for them. And most of their nuclear stocks are old Soviet-era stocks that have likely not been maintained. In fact, Russia has had a lot of failed missile launches from their own territory that were intended for Ukraine in the last 12 months that just simply crash and burn in the motherland. And it's not been a few, it's been a lot. I've seen a lot of them, I've reported on them all the time. So if they were to theoretically launch an ICBM with a nuke warhead, it is entirely plausible that it could catastrophically fail, causing destruction to their own motherland. But I digress. So for the tanks, the floodgates have opened now. We're going to see a lot more coming through now, so this is great to see. And even Canada just announced that it will be upping its Leopard 2 tank pledge commitment from 4 tanks to 8. So that's really great to hear. Same, in fact, goes with Germany. Upped its total number from 14 to 18. Better late than never, Olaf. Oh, and also, Poland is set to deliver 60 of the Soviet-style PT-91 Thordy tanks to Ukraine in the coming days. These ones are basically modernized T-72 tanks. So 60, very keen number there. Also, Sweden has now decided it will send up to 10 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, so fantastic to hear. So in summary, let's call it the tank coalition that is really starting to ramp up now. Then in some other news, the UN General Assembly from just 2 days ago, so they had a resolution for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine based on the principles of the United Nations, which was a motion adopted by a very large majority of the UN General Assembly. 141 in favor in total there. But of course, there were a few outliers, obviously, including the pariah state of North Korea, then also Belarus, and obviously the Russian Federation. Then we also had 32 abstaining countries that didn't want to be seen as taking sides. Oh, and I always love looking at the outcome of these UN General Assembly votes. Not just because of what it represents, but also because the results always look like this 1980s and 1990s style TV teletext presented voting tally data output. So a shout out to 1980s teletext TV displays, if anyone remembers having one of those. Then in some other news, so as mentioned, yesterday marked the sad anniversary of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, but along with it, many cities and countries showed their support and unity for Ukraine and its sovereignty, including Slovakia, Finland, Albania, Israel, Netherlands, Berlin, Lithuania, Cleveland, Ohio, New York as well, city, among many others, too many to mention. And if you're watching this video, very likely your country too. Unless you're a Russian troll in Russia, although there were a few people arrested in Russia yesterday for paying tribute to Ukraine as they placed flowers on Ukrainian statues in the motherland. Then also in some other news, for the year that was, we were able to see Russia's strategic goals misalign and change time and time again. So over time, Russia seemed to get a little bit more realistic in their objectives, but it was certainly a lesson they had to learn the hard way. And to be honest, I still don't even think they have learnt those lessons. Not really. Then in another Russian military mobilization blunder, or what I would consider another mobilization blunder, a little bit of a different one here, but this time we have Russian mobic low morale and disorderly conduct. And so the backstory here is these mobics were drinking too much, no surprises there, then it got out of control, a little bit out of hand to say the least. One guy started severely beating on another, quite so brutally, without getting too much into the specifics, which you can read on the screen yourself if you like. Then the commander investigates, and someone is likely to get severely disciplined for this. At least I would hope so. And you know, I've said it before, but it's bad enough going to war and getting injured or killed by the opposite side, but going to war only to get the living snot beat out of you by your own side, then going home in stitches, well, what a feeling that would be. And it's not even an isolated story. Countless others like them of these types of stories that I've seen now. And this is perhaps my larger overall point here. The life of a mobic. Then we'll move across to some funny news to round it all off for today, guys. So, former Russian President Little Medvedev has continued to say some outlandish statements, most recently of which was, quote, 50 countries today are trying to wipe Russia off the face of the earth, but despite the fact that it is opposed by almost a whole empire of enemies, it is stronger than them. Now it is obvious. End quote. So, first of all, 50 countries are not trying to wipe Russia off the face of the earth. There is no operation to do so, especially to a nuclear state, especially a supposedly modernized nuclear state. But that's their deterrent, right? Their nuclear arsenal. So, how they felt so threatened by Ukraine in the first place just boggles the mind. And then secondly, Russia is stronger than them, apparently, referring to these 50 countries. Well, Russia is clearly having some military strength issues, and that's to put it extremely diplomatically, and is clearly not stronger. Then in a final funny to round it off with, so this one's super strange. So this is from Russian-occupied Melitopol. Here we have footage of a Russian priest of the occupiers, I guess performing his own exorcism? Maybe it's from all that guilt of supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine? which is surely considered evil, at least by genuine Russian Orthodoxy standards. But look at him go. I love this. I'm really going to hold on to this clip. So thanks for watching, guys. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button. Appreciate all your support. Check out my links, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.